Global collaborations, specifically international branch campuses, have a rich history. And early in American higher education, were seen as a resource for developing our emerging practices, um, again, early in the history of American higher ed. International branch campuses date back to the 19th and 20th centuries. Higher education institutions in America sought branch campuses to serve a very specific purpose, typically associated with Christian missions. Catholics, Protestants, Church of Christ were foundational in establishing branch campuses. In some cases, foreign governments now have control over these sparse, irregularly planned campus establishments. In other cases, like in South Korea and Brazil, these established campuses are now monasteries or seminaries, reflecting a similar mission for their original establishment. Now, in the late 1980s and 90s, a wave of American universities sought to establish branch campuses in Latin America, Europe, Australia, the Middle East, Africa, Southeast Asia. The aggressiveness for which branch campuses were being established really alarmed other well-developed nations who also had a rich history in post-secondary education. These nations desired for the expansion of higher and adult education to be regulated on a global scale. So, in 1995, the World Trade Organization introduced a concept called GATS, G-A-T-S, which stands for the General Agreement on Trade and Services. Now, the purpose of GATS was to reduce or eliminate barriers to trade. And education is mentioned in this agreement as one of 12 service sectors. Now, the collectivist philosophy is that countries can educate the citizenry of other countries, introducing new philosophies and values that would help to eliminate issues that have resulted in humanitarian crises. The education sector was split into 5 subcategories. Higher education and adult education were 2 of the 5. Now, with any partner of the World Trade Organization, countries always determine the degree of market accessibility. GATS never gained much traction a decade after its implementation, largely because countries that are affiliated with the World Trade Organization were hesitant to open the door, if you will, widely. Only 20 of the 145 WTO members agreed to participate in this particular part of GATS. Countries like Argentina, Australia, Bahrain, Canada, what was formerly Hong Kong, Israel, Panama, South Korea, and the United States were a few. And if you keep up with geopolitics, you know that some of those that I just mentioned are having troubles right now that have impacted their GATS agreement specific to education. The primary problem is that trade and education are not seen as symbiotic systems. Individuals responsible for trade on a global scale rarely think about how an education system influences trade. Individuals responsible for education are hesitant to sacrifice educational values for the liberalism of global trade. For example, regions of the world associate education as a free social benefit, available to all. Countries, more specifically university entities, view higher and adult education as a commodity with value, This contrast of philosophy has largely led to stale progress with the campaign known as Education Without Borders. A more stringent visa policy and immigration tracking system proved to be an impediment for international student recruitment following the September 11th terrorist attacks. Universities elected to achieve their globalization agenda through a new wave of branch campus establishments throughout the world. Instead of you coming to us, we'll come to you. The pursuit of global partnerships was well received in the early 2000s because post-secondary ed in America had a reasonably high standing, and still does. And the proportion of American universities in world rankings exceeded other countries. And it could be argued that it still does. Universities recognized that a branch campus operation would help facilitate students attending college in the United States for a semester or longer, by first initially training them in their home region, home country, and then motivating them for further graduate study in the United States. Branch campus establishments have slowed considerably over the last decade for a variety of different reasons. There's not just one reason. Collaborations have now taken the form of joint program partnerships in a variety of different disciplines.